You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 22nd of August 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Briefing in association with Addis. Hello and welcome to The Briefing this Friday, broadcasting to you live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak, and coming up on today's programme, a look into France's overseas territories and whether Paris can keep them under some sort of control. Simon Bouvier is in Paris for us. Simon, which one is extra troubling at the moment?
Chris, that one would be New Caledonia. I'll be talking to our very own Ed Stalker about what's going on over there.
More with Simon and Ed in just a moment. After that, Ukraine celebrates independence on Sunday as it continues fighting to keep it. We'll hear from a former Slovak defense minister. After that.
Yes, how I can help you. I just had a problem. I came to meet a client to sell a diamond to them. They looked at the stone, and now they say the stone is not with them anymore.
How much the price for the diamond?
$25 million.
The Dubai diamond heist culprits have been captured. We'll find out how with our Gulf correspondent, Inzamam Rashid. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. And welcome to today's show. Hope you're all having a happy Friday, whether it's just getting started or you're ending and looking into the weekend. We're going to start off today with a bit of a deep dive into the world of France's overseas territories, which have been showing some signs of friction and a bit of an independence movement over the last few years. Joining me now from Milan is Monocle's Europe editor-at-large, Ed Stalker, and from our studio in Paris, our bureau chief, Simon Bouvier. And Ed, this is a thing that you have been discussing with Simon this past week, so I'm going to let you take it away.
It is indeed a thing. And who doesn't need a deep dive into French overseas territories on a Friday afternoon? Yeah, exactly. Simon and myself have been looking into specifically the French overseas territory in the Pacific of New Caledonia. It is a series of islands, as I said, in the Pacific, just northeast of Australia, that's sort of been rocked by an independence movement and sporadic violence over the years, calling for more self-determination. The last in 2024. We now have a government minister, a French government minister over there until Saturday. He is Manuel Valls. Simon, maybe just tell us who Valls is and what he's doing there at the moment.
Hello, Ed. Well, Manuel Valls is a former prime minister, actually. He used to be prime minister under former president François Hollande, and he's returned to government in François Bayrou's government as the overseas territories minister. And in July, he had kind of negotiated pre-accord, pre-deal with the different political forces in New Caledonia to set a kind of timeline for a new type of hybrid status for the island that would make it a state within France as opposed to an independent country. But he is visiting now in a context of this accord potentially falling apart after the main independence group said that they do not support this deal. So, obviously this is a place that France has been before. They've been handling these kind of post-colonial relationships with countries that are now independent in Francophone Africa, but also with territories that remain within France in some capacity. Do you think a lot of people know about these territories outside of the Franco-French world of the Francophonie?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, to a certain extent, perhaps, but France has a very particular relationship with its overseas territories, doesn't it, Simon? Actually, the UK has more overseas territories, but none of them are a sovereign part of the UK. They all have self-determination or a certain regard of a certain amount of autonomy. In the case of France, there are actual places that are a long, long way away from metropolitan France that are still an integral part of France, where they are governed as if they are France. They are, in fact, France. You know, the euro is the currency. I'm talking about French Guiana. I'm talking about Martinique. I'm talking about Guadeloupe, La Réunion in the Indian Ocean. New Caledonia is slightly different. It kind of has its own status, and that's kind of come out of several agreements that have been struck in the territory over decades. It's a collectivity in its own right, its own special collectivity status, which means that it does have some local government, but then France is still in charge of these big portfolios, such as defence and justice. I think one of the things that's worth pointing out specifically about New Caledonia is the fact that it's on a UN list as still needing to be decolonized. So France has, a big commitment to make and a sort of promise to move in that direction. And there have been negotiations over a long time. The FLNK, which you talked about before, Simon, isn't currently in power, but still holds a lot of sway in the territory. And it seems, to a certain extent, that France wants to have its cake and eat it. It wants to create this sort of unprecedented thing of a new state, but within the French constitution. So you'd have, potentially a new Caledonian passport as well as a French one if you lived there. Of course, the opposition independent movement has rejected this at the moment. Simon, you've sort of witnessed, I guess, France's relationships with its territories and even its former colonies. You were in West Africa reporting for Monocle recently in the Ivory Coast. They talk about France-Afrique, this very strong relationship that France has with its West African former colonies, including Senegal and, of course, the Ivory Coast. Is there a fear, I wonder? What's the view in France that greater autonomy for New Caledonia and even eventual independence could lead to a breakup of these territories? And I guess I ask this because Macron has this strong worldview, doesn't he? He really views France as having a strong position in the world, as being a global leader. He's looked to very much do that from a position of strength within Europe. But, are these territories also of sort of geopolitical importance? New Caledonia is in the Pacific. Does it give France a chance to sort of extend its global power by having a foothold in the Pacific?
I mean, I think Macron certainly hopes so. I think he looks at what used to be the U.S. strategy of pivoting to Asia in the face of increasing geopolitical competition from China and increasingly assertive behavior from China in the region. And his whole thing was, we're relevant too, thanks to New Caledonia, which makes the independence movement there. And, as you mentioned earlier, Ed, there are quite a few different ones. And, the situation in Martinique or Guadeloupe or French Guiana is not at all the same as it is in New Caledonia. And the combination of that and the strategic import of the territory makes the French government's moves there particularly crucial for France's strategic interests, but also for its commitment to allowing the population of the island to determine its own fate. As you mentioned, there have been a succession of treaties and accords between Paris and Nouméa, the capital of New Caledonia, on, you're going to get to vote on whether you want full independence from France. Those votes did happen in 2018, 2020, and then the last one during the pandemic was boycotted by the opposition. We had violence there last year after the French government tried to move forward with an electoral law reform that would give more weight to people who are more recent inhabitants of the island as opposed to the autochthonous Kanak population. So it's really an uneven situation how the relationships with the capital are going in these overseas territories that are part of France. And I think the same could be said of the former colonies. You know, as you mentioned, I was in Côte d'Ivoire recently, and even though in the neighborhood there's outright hostility towards Paris, and it's kind of used as a scarecrow, as a scapegoat to explain away all of the problems that the countries are going through right now, which France did have a hand in creating or not helping in. It's not a question of them having zero responsibility in all this. But in Côte d'Ivoire, relationships are positively warm. All of these politicians and businessmen keep traveling between Paris and Abidjan constantly. So it's a very different situation than it is in Senegal, for instance. But you know, to come back to New Caledonia, I think the next steps are going to be crucial. I don't know that Valls' visit is going to change the fundamental dynamic, which is that the hardcore independence movement want a new vote on full independence, and there's a possibility that violence might resume. And you know,
because they're not getting what they want, are they?
Yeah, exactly.
They're not getting what they want because, you know, they're still planning to change the electoral register to allow people who've only been in the territory for 10 years to vote. That was sort of one of the reasons for violence in 2024. This accord would move the date for that happening to 2031, but it still seems that could potentially at least spark violence, no?
And and as you said, you know, this has not been voted on yet by anybody. So these are outlines that are still negotiable for all of this. So that's the purpose of Valls' visit. He was trying to get this FLNKS back on side, and he hasn't succeeded so far. So we'll have to see how this electoral law question plays into the negotiations, because of course holding a vote there to accept or not an agreement while this electoral law question is not settled is not smart. So the electoral law thing will have to be resolved before any vote on the future status happens. But, you know, the French, Ed, you've been looking into also other independence movements on the continent that might not be quite so far away from the kind of former metropolis, or even if there was no kind of previous colonial relationship. I'm thinking of Spain, for instance. Do you think there's some learnings there for France on how they should handle this?
I mean, obviously they're pretty different, aren't they? They're different and similar in some ways. You know, overseas territories are very different, as I mentioned before. Some of them are governed in different ways. But, you know, France does have problems closer to home. Corsica, you could say, is its most restive region. There's been violence there in the past, most recently in 2022, when a nationalist was beaten up and died in prison. You know, Caledonia, of course, has been a touch point in Spain as well. You know, the Corsica question is different, but I think it's similar in the sense that France needs to find a way of conceding, you know, in some parts, because it has to, because it's a reality, a political reality, and also projecting a show of strength as a state, because there's a fear that it could lead to not necessarily a breakup, but you know, similar problems in other regions, and of course, you know, it could sort of allow things to follow in other European nations, where of course there are regional movements as well. So a lot to unpack, Simon. But I think we did all right, didn't we?
For sure, and we'll be back. I think Chris will have to invite us back, but for now, back to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Simon Bouvier in Paris and Ed Stalker in Milan, taking us on a deep dive tour of France's overseas territories and the many, many dynamics between them. Now, here on Monocle Radio, here's Anita Riota with the day's other news headlines.
25 people have been killed in Gaza City, where Israel's most intense bombardments are taking place. The UN says the city and surrounding areas are now experiencing a famine. The UK, Australia, and Japan are among 21 countries that have condemned Israel's plans to build a controversial illegal settlement in the occupied West Bank. Germany's economy shrank by 0.3% in the second quarter, this compared with the first 3 months of the year. Demand from its top trading partner, the United States, has slowed following months of buying ahead in anticipation of U.S. tariffs. Germany is the only member of the G7 advanced economies that has failed to grow for the last 2 years. Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company TSMC has booked its first ever profit from its Arizona subsidiary in the first half of this year. This comes 4 years after operations began, contributing $150 million in net profit. The company attributed the turnaround to strong market demand and high factory utilization. A Japanese city is urging all smartphone users to limit screen time to 2 hours a day outside of work or school under a proposed ordinance that includes no penalties. The limit will be recommended for all residents in central Japan's Toyake City. The draft urges elementary school students to avoid smartphones after 9 p.m., and junior high students and older residents are advised not to use them after 10 p.m. Those are today's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Anita, and good luck to that Japanese city trying to enforce any sort of mobile phone rules after 10 p.m. in the evening at home. Well, on Sunday, to move on for today's show, on Sunday, Ukraine will celebrate Independence Day, marking the day that it freed itself from the Soviet Union and declared itself independent in 1991. It's been a week of feverish diplomacy in the run-up to this weekend's celebration, and for the view from Central Europe on the ongoing peace talks and summitry of the past 7 days. I spoke earlier with Martin Sklenar, former Slovakian defense minister and currently director of the Future of Security program at Globsec, a think tank that is based in Bratislava. He began by reflecting on Ukraine's independence.
Ukraine is still, from where I stand, is still an independent country. It has to deal with a devastating war of aggression from Russia. That doesn't mean that the independence has changed, right? I mean, this is exactly the kind of idea that Ukraine wants to protect. They have to fight the war. They have to defend, just because they have no other possibility. So, I mean, in a way, it's actually quite symbolic to remember this on their Independence Day.
It has been such an important week in terms of diplomacy, of meetings that tackle some of the issues there, the war, the questions of sovereignty, territorial integrity, all of that. I wonder what you made of both the meetings in Washington, D.C. earlier this week and the prospects of a Putin-Zelensky meeting going forward. Can something come out of this?
It was actually very suspenseful, I would have to say, to follow the developments, and everything is coming together really quickly. And let's see how much of the momentum can actually be taken advantage of, right? Because we see, there's undoubtedly the role of the president of the United States has been critical in making sure that this actually has some kind of momentum, that the possibility of finding a settled solution, a diplomatic solution, a negotiated solution, or a sustainable peace in Ukraine, this is actually now a possibility from the point of view of the United States, Europe, and Ukraine. It doesn't look that Russia really, or Vladimir Putin, think about this as a procedure or a process that should actually lead to a sustainable peace or to the solution of the situation. Because we see very confusing or mixed signals coming from the Kremlin.
To the point of those mixed signals from Moscow, Martin, there has been a lot of talk of security guarantees this week. Coming from, frankly, yourself, a country that obviously has some experience with Russia and the Soviet Union, can you imagine Vladimir Putin and Russia respecting security guarantees if they were to come to pass? What would that even look like?
That's the most important question I think the European leaders were asking in the White House. How can we trust that Russia is going to obey guarantees or will stick to the guarantees or will respect whatever the agreement will be at the end of these negotiations? Because we have seen Russia repeatedly breaking agreements and arrangements Again, in Ukraine, I mean, we had the Budapest Memorandum from 1994, which was exactly a guarantee for Ukraine, saying that if Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons, their sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity will be guaranteed by Russia, among other countries. That has not happened. So this is the biggest question. We don't know what is the Russian position. It looks like it's not really following any progress in the negotiations and rather wants to torpedo or basically make obstacles on the road just to prolong it and have arguments to basically get out of the negotiations at any time and just continue fighting.
Once there is, if there is, assuming there is some sort of peace deal between Ukraine and Russia, what would enforcement of that look like from your perspective? Can you actually imagine boots on the ground from European nations in Ukraine?
Well, it will certainly depend on what are the what will be the situation when the negotiations end and what will be the agreement. I think for European security in general, for Ukrainian security, and for a return to a state that we thought that we lived before the full-scale invasion, or even before the Crimea invasion in 2014, when we thought that these kind of situations will not be happening, it will be extremely important to have a very strong Ukrainian force on the ground. So there should not be any limitations on Ukraine when it comes to finding agreements or coming to the final form of agreements. There should be either a presence of European and US military force in Ukraine, or a clear mechanism how, if necessary, these forces will be called into action should there be anything similar or any attack on Ukraine going on, not only from Russia, but maybe also from other places, just to be as general as possible. But there needs to be, these two things need to be in place: a strong Ukrainian army and a strong, clear, quick and obvious mechanism of military support for Ukraine. Only then the deterrence will work, and there is a chance that Russia will rethink its aggressive actions and change the course of its policy and decisions as it has done so far.
Martin, if Russia and whether it will stick to security guarantees is the one big question, perhaps the other big question is whether the US and Europe together will stay united behind Ukraine. What does that look like? Again, also from your perspective, in particular, coming from a country, Slovakia, that one has to say, with a couple of others in Central Europe, are perhaps challenging a bit of that unity.
That's true. That's part of the politics in Europe, in Central Europe. I mean, it's the nature of the political process and of the democratic process. What we have seen in the White House, we have seen European leaders, not just EU leaders, but European leaders representing the continent as such, making sure that the US sees, that the President Trump sees Europe fully committed to helping to solve this situation. I think it was a strong signal. I think it was a very well prepared, organized, and implemented meeting from the side of the Europeans, and I hope they have put in enough strength into this to keep the US engaged. Because without the US, the negotiations, obviously, and then also the solution and implementation of any negotiation will not be possible. So European unity and the unity between the US and Europe, it's always going to be a challenge, but there are many, other situations in which unity is questionable or is, there are some emerging things that are trying to disrupt the unity. But I think, and I strongly believe, that Europe will find a way to remain united in the way that will be necessary to make sure that the implementation of the negotiation can go through. And the case of Slovakia especially is a very tricky one. If you see how the Slovak government performs, it's basically two different things. One is the rhetoric that comes mostly for their internal consumption, so to say, for the Slovak constituencies and audiences, but the decisions and the acts that the government does go in a different direction. So the government most of the times votes with other European nations on important issues, including so far on sanctions against Russia. So the Slovak position is a very, very specific one.
Indeed. Martin Sklenar, former Slovak defense minister, now with Globsec. Thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak. It is coming up on 12:25 here in London, and we're going to head to the UAE now for a tale as old as time, but with a modern twist. That would be a diamond heist that has had a surprise ending. To tell us more, we're joined from Dubai, by our Gulf correspondent, Inzamam Rashid. And Inzamam, the last time we have had you on a show, you were complaining about parking tickets, so I guess you did not get your own hands on that diamond.
No, I didn't, because given the amount of money you have to pay for a parking fine out here, that would have been quite helpful. But this story in particular is that of most definitely a Netflix kind of drama or a documentary. I really wouldn't be surprised if it's turned into something like that in the near future. And of course, it had to be a pink diamond, just like the Pink Panther film. A 21 carat rare pink diamond valued at $25 million, Chris, was stolen.
It was stolen, and of course it had to be a pink diamond, as you say. I believe we have a little bit of audio that we can play about this and how they caught the three men. Let's have a little listen.
Yes, how I can help you? I just had a problem. I came to meet a client to sell a diamond to them. They looked at the stone, and now they say the stone is not with them anymore.
How much the price for the diamond?
$25 million.
So that's a little clip that was released. Tell us about this clip. And I guess everyone there is very proud.
Yeah, and it kind of adds to the drama, right? Because Dubai police only released this information out the other day, and they released it out in dramatic fashion because they were involved heavily, obviously, in recovering the diamond, but also catching the people involved. So that phone call was the supplier of the diamond calling up the police to complain that someone had stolen the diamond off them and wanted to report that they'd run off with this diamond. But this story is incredible because a gang posed as pretty wealthy buyers, rented luxury cars, they arranged meetings with the supplier at very high-end hotels. They even at one stage brought a diamond expert to inspect the stone. So it all looked very legit, and obviously in Dubai, a place where everything is pretty flashy already, kind of providing the cars, providing the high-end meeting spots. It all looked pretty real. They then lured the jeweler into a villa in Dubai under false pretenses. They sat down with the sellers and they snatched the diamond and did a runner. These three men did a runner. They went off in separate ways and they tried to flee the country. Dubai police were then obviously informed, as we just heard in that phone call, and within 8 hours, just 8 hours, they managed to catch these criminals. They managed to arrest them and recover the pink diamond, this 21 carat rare pink diamond, in a fridge in Dubai.
In a fridge, of all things, that they managed to recover. How common is a story like this, Inzamam? What kind of rounds is it making in Dubai?
It's quite interesting because, people who live in Dubai will know that Dubai is very, very safe. You find often influencers try and do this test where they leave their very expensive handbag on the bonnet of the car, or leave the car keys and the car door unlocked, and often people won't. Well, most times people won't steal the item or steal the car. I don't think anyone's ever done a video where someone has stolen it. But Dubai is kind of it is very safe. And as a resident here, you feel very, very safe. You feel like nothing would ever happen. But this was clearly a kind of premeditated, pre-planned operation that had taken place to steal this pink diamond. And I was actually looking back at some of the recent kind of diamond heists. There were quite a few around 2015, 2016, but there was a big one that happened around 2007, and that was at a mall where two cars crashed into a jewelry store. They stole a load of jewelry, and then they tried to run away, but the cars couldn't leave the mall, and there was just a great CCTV footage of these two Audis just basically parked in a mall, and they couldn't move anywhere. But the police out here react very, very quickly. They've got very good artificial intelligence systems that they use to try and track people down. Obviously, a lot of CCTV around Dubai as well. And they moved incredibly fast within 8 hours to catch these thieves and to recover the diamond which was sitting in a fridge.
Police burgeoning their reputation as crime fighters in Dubai. Monocle's golf correspondent, Inzamam Rashid, thank you very much for joining us. And that's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Tom Webb, our researcher was Henry King, and our studio manager was Steph Changu. The Briefing is back on Monday at the same time, which means there will be a weekend in between. Hope you all enjoy it. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.